Hello guys, welcome to Unit 4, Multiplying and Dividing Rational Numbers. The last unit we were doing addition and subtraction of rational numbers, and so we're going to start with the multiplying and dividing. Now I do want you to note that the rules for multiplying and dividing are different than that for adding and subtracting. In our last unit we talked about if we had two of the same, then we added them and it stayed the same sign. If they were two opposite signs, we subtracted and it took the sign of the greatest absolute value. And that is the rules for adding and subtracting. But the rules for multiplying and dividing are a little bit different, and so we're going to jump into these. If you would like to get a page to take notes out, or if you would like to just watch the video again later on, that's completely fine. But do please remember that the rules are different. One of the biggest mistakes that students make at this level is to mix those rules up. So adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing are two different sets of rules. Alright, so with that said, we're going to start off with talking about if you're multiplying two positive numbers, and this is something you guys have done before, so I'm going to use the numbers 3 times 4, and this is a positive 3 times a positive 4, and a positive 3 times a positive 4, as you guys all know, equals a positive 12. Both of those are positive numbers, so you have a positive product. Okay? Now, if we have negative 3 times negative 4, because you have two negative numbers, you will also get a positive product. A negative times a negative also creates a positive. Okay? So if, in looking at this, if we have two numbers that are either positive or two numbers that are both either negative and you multiply or divide them together, then your answer is going to be a positive answer. So we can actually create that rule right there. We can say that if the signs are the same when multiplying and dividing rational numbers, the answer is positive. Okay? Now let's look at those two. If we have a negative or a positive 3 times a negative 4, if we have a positive 3 times a negative 4, we are going to get a negative product, negative 12. Right? What if our first number is negative? If we have a negative 3 times a positive 4, we also get a negative product. Okay? So with this, if we can look at these and say, well, if the signs are different because we have a positive 3 and a negative 4 when multiplying those together, or a negative 3 and a positive 4 multiplying those together, then we get a negative product. Then the rule for this would be if the signs are different when multiplying and dividing rational numbers, the answer is going to be negative. Okay? Negative. Now, those are the two basic rules for multiplying and dividing rational numbers. Like I said, we don't want to get these confused with adding and subtracting. Well, what if we have more than two numbers? What if we have the numbers 3 times negative 2 times negative 1? Okay? So I have 3 times 2. Well, we can only theoretically multiply two numbers together at one time. Okay? So if you're looking at this, we're going to just break it down and we're going to look at the first two numbers And we're going to say 3 times negative 2. Well, the rules are if the signs are different, then the answer is negative. So that's going to give us a negative 6. Okay? Bring down your negative 1. Now you look at these two numbers, negative 6 and negative 1, and we refer back to the rule if the signs are both the same, then the answer is positive. So this is going to give us a positive 6. Okay, so what if you have a negative 3 times a negative 2 times a negative 1? Okay, so we have 3 negatives. So let's try again. Let's start with the first 2. I'm just putting the parentheses around them so you can see that I'm going to multiply these 2 first. And you can multiply in order from left to right, because that is what PEMDAS tells you to do, is multiply and divide from left to right. So negative 6 times negative 2, if the signs are the same, that gives you a positive 6. Negative 3 times negative 2 is equal to positive 6, because the numbers are both negative, they're both the same. Bring down your times negative 1. So if you have negative or positive 6 times negative 1, both of those are different signs, so that will give you a negative 6. Okay? So sometimes changing the signs on the numbers will give you a different answer, because this ended up being positive 6. The first one was a positive times a negative, gave you a positive answer. And the second one was a negative times a negative times a negative, and it gave you a negative answer. Okay? Alright, so with that said, we are going to go to the next page, and we are going to fill in this chart. Now in 6th grade, you guys talked about the coordinate plane quite a bit, and we discussed the coordinate plane in 7th grade, but we stayed a lot in our first quadrant. And our first quadrant is actually right here. This is quadrant 1. And it is where if you go over to the right and up, so if you guys should be familiar with the rules, if you're going to plot a point, the point was, let's say it was 1, 1. Those are both positive. So we're going to move in a positive direction to the right and a positive direction up, because we want to go to the quadrant that calls for 1, 1. Okay, so as we plot that point, we're actually, instead of having to do it on crosshairs like you normally do when you're plotting points, we're actually just going to fill in the box. If we go positive 1 to the right and up 1 to the right, the answer 1 times 1 equals 1. Okay? So that would actually kind of be like 0.11 because it's positive, positive. Okay, so if we go back to the center point right here in our little quadrant plane, if we go over to the 2 and go up 1, we go over 2 and up 1, and our answer 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so let's go over to back to our center and go over 1, 2, 3 and up 1, and our answer is going to be 1 times 3 is 3. And let's go back and start at our center, go over 1 times 4 is 4, and the 1 times 5 is 5. So all we're doing at this point is we are taking the number that's in the little orange block on the bottom, which is your x-axis, and the number that's in the block that belongs to your y-axis, and we are multiplying those. So this is x, and this is y. Okay, so for those of you out there. Alright, let's see. So let's do it with the next row. Let's go, it'll be the 2. So 2 times 1 is 2. We can go a little bit faster. Oops, I have my eraser on. It's 2. And 2 times 2 is 4. And 2 times 3, which has already been filled out for us, is 6. And 2 times 4 is 8. And 2 times 5 is 10. Okay? Now we're going to do the rest of it. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 times 5 is 15, 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 3 is 12, 4 times 4 is 16, 4 times 5 is 20, 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 4 is 20, and 5 times 5 is 25, okay? So, let's stop and look at this right here. It says, the first question over here to the right, it says, what does this quadrant represent? Okay? So it looks like this quadrant represents where your positive times your positives are. And if you have numbers like 1, 2, or 3, 6, or anything, both of your x and your y values are both positive. And so this is a positive quadrant. And if you guys, when in multiplying, like we talked about the rules, if you multiply those two together, a positive times a positive, you also get a positive. So this is a positive quadrant, and that's what we're going to put. This is a positive quadrant. So when you multiply the two numbers together, they are positive numbers. Let's actually write that. When multiplying, I'm timesing two numbers, two positive numbers. So let's say, let's erase that and put two positive numbers. Two positive, positive. Hard to write with this thing. When timesing two positive numbers together, you get a positive answer. Okay. So when multiplying two positive numbers together, you get a positive answer. All right, so let's look down at, actually let's go down to quadrant, let's go over to quadrant 2, okay? So quadrant 2 is actually right here. And if you look, I'm going to go ahead and fill in, since if this was the number line and the x and y axis, you can look, and so if this is actually your 0 point, then this would be -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5. Okay, so let's fill in this side. If I have a +1 times a -1, I have -1. +1 times -2 is -2. +1 times -3 is -3. +1 times -4 is -4. +1 times -5 is -5. +2 times -1 is -2. +2 times -2 is -4. -6, -8, -10. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and fill these in for you guys. Okay, so I just took a second and filled this in for you guys, and I want you to look really carefully at what the products are. In quadrant 2, if you have a positive times a negative, when you multiply positive times a negative, you're getting a negative product. So over here it says, what does this quadrant represent? So I'm going to actually write down when you times two, well, no, times a positive and a negative, sorry. When you times a positive number with a negative number, the answer is a negative answer. Okay? When you multiply or when you times a positive number with a negative number, sorry, my handwriting is so sloppy. It's hard to write with this. The answer is a negative. So your product or your answer is negative, okay? All right, so let's look down and look at the quadrant 4. Okay, so quadrant 4 is actually kind of close to quadrant 2. I'm going to circle quadrant 4 here. It's down in the bottom right hand corner. So if you look at it, it says 0 times 1, or 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. And then we have negative 2 and negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. Look up here, we have the same. And then 1 times negative 2, negative 2. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Negative 3. Negative 6. Negative 9. Negative 12. And negative 15. Okay, I went ahead and filled it out for you. So take a look at quadrant 4 and quadrant. It says, well, let's just look at what it says. What does the quadrant represent? So if I look at that and I say positive times a negative, it looks like my products are negative. So when you multiply, put times on there, times a negative number with a positive number, the answer is a negative. Alright, so let's just stop right there for a second and look at this. If you guys look at quadrant 2 and quadrant 4, what do they have in common? They both have negative products. They both are multiplied, a positive times a negative, and have a negative product, okay? So if we are looking at 2 and 4 that are across from each other, positive times a negative, it gives us a negative. And we'll look at quadrant 1, and a positive times a positive gives us a positive. What can we infer that's going to be quadrant 3? Well, we have a negative times a negative. If you look at the rules on the beginning page, I think you're going to see how that's going to be a positive. Okay, so I'm going to go here, and I'm going to circle quadrant 3. And we're going to look at that, and we say negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. Negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. And negative 3 times a negative 1 is a positive 3. Positive 4, positive 5, okay? And then negative 2 times negative 1 is a positive 2. We got a positive 4, a positive 6, a positive 8, a positive 10. Because we have a negative times a negative, okay? So this one's going to be a positive 3, positive 6, positive 9, positive 12, positive 15, positive 4, positive 8, positive 12, positive 16, positive 20, positive 5, positive 10, positive 15, positive 20, and positive 25. Alright, so if we go and answer our question, what does this quadrant represent? We could say, when you multiply to, well, if I can spell right, to negative numbers, you get a positive. Okay? You get a positive answer. Now, the reason that we did this, because I could have just given you the rules and said a negative times a negative is a positive, or same signs are positive and different signs are negative. But I wanted you to see this laid on a quadrant plane, or coordinate plane, because next year you guys are going to be doing graphing. And if you know anything like when we start talking about linear graphs, and you guys are talking about that a lot next year, if you know anything about that already, you would know that if a line is graphed in the first and the third quadrant, it's always going to be positive, a linear line. If it's graphed in the second or the fourth quadrant, it's always going to be a negative linear line. And this is kind of the precursor, and it kind of shows you why. Because if we are graphing a line just like that, that's going in a positive, it has a positive slope, because it actually passes kind of through that first and that third quadrant. It leans that direction, even though it just tips that second quadrant or the fourth quadrant. That doesn't matter, because it's still going in the direction of positive, positive, and negative, negative. Well, as if you have a line that goes through that is a negative line, this is a negative linear, this is a positive linear line. It is in quadrants 2 and 4, and if you can see that, you will understand that that is a negative, has a negative slope. And so that's just a little kind of preview of some of the things you're going to be doing next year, and that's how it fits in with our positive and negative multiplication, and how you really need to understand these rules before you move on. Okay? Now let's do some practice. I'm going to write some questions down, and I want you guys to help me answer these. So let's say that I have the number 6, positive 6 times negative 3. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to do is I would look and say, are these same signs or different signs? And they're different. So can you tell me what the answer to positive 6 times negative 3 would be? I hope that you guys said negative 18, because you multiply your 3 times 6, and because only one of your signs is negative, you have different signs, your answer is going to be negative. Okay? What about negative 10 times 5? What product would we get here? Okay? We have negative 50. Okay, because we have two different signs, and so our answer, the product, is 50. All right, what if we have negative 3 times negative 8? Okay, well, we have two negatives, so if we have the same sign, our product is going to be positive, which means we have a positive 24. Okay, now let's practice some division. If you had a negative 12 and you divide that by positive 4, our answer would be 3. But now, does the rule still work with a negative and a positive? Of course they do, because multiplication and division are just the opposite operations, so it's still the same thing, so our 3 would be negative. Okay? What if we have 100 divided by 20? Okay? Well, both of these are positive, so we just have positive 5. Okay? Let's see. I've got one for you. What if you had, when we actually do this in class, we play something called the integer card game. And with that, we would look at a couple cards. Let's say we have a 5 and we have a negative 6. What is the product? What would we get from these two cards? Okay? Right? It's negative 30. Exactly. And what if the other hand was a 2 and a 3? Okay? Well, this guy's got a positive 6. Okay? So whose hand, if the bigger hand wins, whose hand is better? The negative 3 or the positive 6? The positive 6 would win, even though 6 is is closer to the number line or to 0 on the number line. 6 is a positive number, and all positive numbers are always greater than any negative number. Okay. Let's see. What if you get a What if you get a 0 card and then you get a -2? Okay. Can you tell me what answer you have for that? 0. That's right, because 0 times any number is always 0, and there's no such thing as a -0. This is the only number that doesn't have an opposite because it is the center of the number line. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, this is actually homework assignment number 6. These are the 2 word problems that are on your assignment, so you can look at these, and basically when you do your work you can copy these down if you want to. Hopefully you'll remember how to do them. So the stock market fell 60 points over a period of 4 days. What was the average change in the stock market each day? Okay, so we're going to use cubes, and so we start off with our circle, underline, box, explain, and solve. Okay, so let's start with the U, and we are going to underline what we need to know. What was the average change in the stock market each day? That's what it's asking. Okay, so now we're going to circle any important numbers. The stock market fell 60 points. Okay, so the 60 points is an important number over a period of 4 days, and 4 days is also important. And even though sometimes they don't put the numbers, they write them in words, they're also still relevant. Okay, now let's box any action words. So the stock market fell. Well, fell is an action word, and fell represents going down, so that'd be a negative word. So it says, what was the average change in the stock market each day? So if it is falling 60 points, so we're explaining this by saying 60 points total, okay, and it says over a period of 4 days, so we're dividing that total over a period of 4 days. Now, let me explain. The reason I know that it's division and not multiplication is because a stock market fell 60 points. So that's the total amount of points it fell. So if it's giving you the total to start with, then and asking you to see what was the average change in each day, so it was a part of like the days, that means that it wants you to do division because it starts with the total and wants to know what each is. Okay, so -60 divided by +4, and 4 is going to be positive because you can't have negative days. Just like time and distance never goes backwards. So anything that has to do with days or going a distance is always going to be a positive number. So now we're looking at the math. So we have our explanation. 60 points over a period of 4 days is -60 divided by +4. That is going to give me a -15. Okay, so I would write -15 points per day, and that is my explanation that I solved. -15 points per day. Okay. Question number 10 says, each day Valerie charges her lunch account for her lunch. If the cost of lunch is $3, then by how much has her lunch account been impacted over the period of 15 days? Okay, so let's think about this. If we're going to start with the U, we underline how much has her lunch account been impacted over the period of 15 days. So that's our question. How much has her lunch been charged over a period of 15 days? So Valerie charges her lunch. Well, charge to me sounds like a action word because charge means that we are taking money out of an account. So that's a negative action word, okay? If the cost of lunch is $3, so I'm going to circle the $3 because I know that, and cost is also an action word. So it kind of helps with the charge. If you're charging something for lunch and the cost of lunch, that means that both of those are referring to negative numbers. And then it says, then by how much has her lunch account been impacted over a period of 15 days? Well, it looks like I'm going to go down here and circle the 15 days because that is important math as well, important numerical information. Okay, so if we are thinking about this, are we going to multiply or are we going to divide? Well, do I have a total? I know it's 15 days and I know it's $3 each day, but I don't have the total amount that her charge was. So it looks to me like I'm going to have to multiply. I'm going to have to multiply 3, but my 3 is going to be negative because it's a charge, right? So negative $3 is coming out every day for the total of 15 days, so times 15. So that is our number sentence is going to be negative 3 times positive 15, and it's going to give us a negative 45. Okay? So if I was going to restate this, I would say negative 45, well, I need to write a dollar sign. So let's do negative dollar sign $45 came out of her account. And that's the total amount, not per day. That is the total amount that came out. And that's how we know that we are supposed to multiply this, because we're looking for the total amount that had been impacted. Okay? Alright, so that is how you're going to do your word problems. And these are the 2 word problems on your assignment 6 again. So good luck with your assignments. Make sure that you do your multiplication and division assignment 4 and 5, and then assignment 6. This should help you with that. Have a great week.